my name is Beck and welcome to my September wrap up. I actually had an upswing in my reading during September, which I'm really proud of thanks to the Magical Readathon, which I vlogged, and I will link those below. There are only 2 of them. I really enjoyed that readathon, and like I said, it made an upswing in my reading. So I started the month on a book that I found only okay, and then after that I read like 5 or 6 books, and I'm also currently reading about 3 of them, so I will talk about those at the end of the wrap up. But I'm going to start this off with King of Thorns by Mark Lawrence. This is a grimdark high fantasy book for adults, and it follows Jorg. He's about 11 to 13 in the first book, and it really traverses him as a really dark character, and he's getting revenge, I guess, on his father for the murders of his mother and his brother, and he is left in a thorn bush, and he obviously wants to enact revenge after that point. I don't want to talk too much about what the second book is about because obviously it will spoil you for what happened in the first book, because this one picks up in a couple of years after the first one has left off. So Jorg is naturally aging through the series, which I like. I like following a character from when they were younger to middle teens and then in their early 20s. And I believe the next book is when Jorg is in his early 20s. Because this series is so dark and it tends to tackle sexual violence, rape and manipulation of the mind without consent, and Jorg is a very dark character surrounded by dark people as well in terms of characters and motivations. It's not really a series that is for me, so I picked this up knowing that I probably wouldn't enjoy it, but there are a couple of key scenes in here that are really interesting to me because they're very cinematic and cataclysmic, and I like how they were conveyed, but ultimately I don't really like Mark Lawrence's writing style. I find it very haphazard in terms of describing something. It does have a lot of time skips in this book, and I just didn't keep up with them, and I didn't enjoy them because it didn't glean enough information for me in a sentence, for example, and you kind of process the sentence and then go, hang on, and have to go back and reread it in order to get its meaning. So it felt like there wasn't enough detail conveyed in what was happening, and I just didn't like Mark Lawrence's writing. So subjectively for me, wasn't really a book for me. I'm not going to continue on to the third book. I gave this between a 2 stars and a 3 stars. Honestly, I'm not really sure what to rate it, so I'm not going to continue. That's all you really need to know about how I feel about this. And then after that, I jumped into a book that is very different and much easier to read, and that is Bridge of Souls by V.E. Schwab. I've got a whole video about V.E. Schwab and her kind of writing style and the themes she tackles in an author spotlight, so if you'd like to check that out and roughly what each of her series is about with no spoilers involved, you can go and check that video out. This is the 3rd book in her City of Ghosts series, her Cassidy Blake series, and it's a middle grade, so it's for younger readers. Cassidy's around 11 or 12 years old. When she was younger, she fell into a lake off her bike, was rescued by a ghost, and so she's gone to the land of the dead and then come back. So she can now see ghosts, interact with them, and go to the Vale, which is like the land between the living and dead. I guess it's like an in-between kind of state. And because of that, she has a best friend, Jacob, and he is a ghost. He's the one who saved her life. In addition to that, her parents actually have a TV show where they discuss ghosts, and they go to the like capital cities and that kind of thing that are quite popular in terms of ghost tourist attractions. One of her parents is a believer, one's a non-believer, and they don't know Cassidy can see ghosts and interact with them. So you get to traverse the world and see all these cool ghost-like places, and you have this subplot of Cassidy encountering all these ghostly creatures and trying to solve these ghostly mysteries, at the same time traversing a friendship with somebody who is not really alive. And then there's also someone that she meets in the 2nd book, which plays a part in this book a little bit as well. So it was nice to see some carryover of the characters. I gave this a 5 stars, I think, or a 4 stars, or 4.5. I gave it a high rating. I can't quite remember, but usually I give middle grade that is quite fun and fast paced a higher rating. So I imagine I gave this a 5. I enjoyed myself. The writing was really clean, neat, and very descriptive, and very fast moving as well. I was never bored during reading this. I found the character development interesting and believable, and ultimately a few things that I thought would be explored further were wrapped up in this book. So I'm interested to see where the series goes next. Not that that is surprising in a bad way. I want to know what happens after this. If you are interested in a middle grade series, I think V.E. Schwab does it very well, and she also tackles the identity and mortality kind of thoughts in all of her work, and I like how she interacts with that kind of thinking about mortality and more existential stuff, especially when she literally navigates talking to ghosts in her middle grade series. So again, I gave this a decent rating. I'm happy that I gave it a 4 or 4.5, maybe a 5. I'm really not sure, but I did give it a high rating. I enjoy this series. I like V. Schwab's writing. I'm going to continue. And then after that, I read a young adult fantasy book, which is quite unusual for me. I don't really delve into young adult very much anymore because I know my tastes have grown past that, and so I don't reach for it as often. And I did go through a massive young adult phase, and I rated a lot of them very highly. When if I go back now, I'd probably rate them like 3 stars-ish because I enjoy them, but they're not favorites anymore. So it's a surprise that I read Fireborn, and I enjoyed this one. I gave it a 3.5. In terms of the way it dealt with its content, with juggling characters and drama and relationships, I think it handled everything in a very balanced way. I just personally wasn't driven for the story in general because it follows these 2 characters, Annie and Lee, and a while ago when Lee was a kid, his family are the royal family and they were murdered in a rebellion, and so he's gone to this orphanage to grow up for the rest of his life at. And while he was at this orphanage, he met Annie, and Annie is an orphan but on the other side of the rebellion. So she was on the poor side who rebelled against the royals because in this world you have dragons, and so only the royal characters in this world were privileged enough to ride dragons. The poorer classes didn't get the chance to, and so the rebellion was to overthrow this kind of trickle down of political power, and so we are now very much on the back of that rebellion and the trauma it has enacted on the people afterwards, especially with Lee, when all of the poorer communities and pretty much the whole capital celebrate this day of change when it was actually the day that his family got murdered. And so it's a national holiday and he has to relive that trauma pretty much every year. So you see the suffering, and I think that was navigated very well. You get to see grief in addition to that, and you also navigate the complicated relationship that Lee has with the political nature of the book and also with dragon riding. The first chapters in this opened with a contest, and that is the contest to become first rider, which is like a political or politically charged position, and anybody who is a dragon rider can enter that. And so Annie and Lee are both in that competition, and so are their friends, and so it's interesting to see all of the different backgrounds come together and how relationships, romantic and otherwise, were navigated. I think all of those things were handled really well, but in terms of the pacing and the tension, I didn't quite get on board as much as I wanted to. I did enjoy all the detail. I really liked the world building. I quite liked the way all of the characters meshed together and interacted. I had a lot of respect for this, but unfortunately, I just don't know what it was, but something to do with the pacing and just the tension of the book overall. It just didn't hook me, and I really wanted to be hooked, but sometimes you just go into a book and you want it to hook you and it just doesn't happen. And that was just this book for me. So I gave it a 3.5. It was enjoyable and I would 100% recommend it, but it just personally wasn't something that I could get up on my soapbox about, and I really wish I could. I seem to have gone with a red and black theme by accident, but the next book is blue, so it really deviates. The next book that I read was a Dresden book, and it is Cold Days. This is the 14th Dresden Files book. Because it's a 14th book in the series, I obviously can't talk too much about it. It involves Faye. There is at Dresden, who's a wizard detective, and he's very much ensconced in this world of the supernatural. It really started out in this series as like a monster of the week solving supernatural murders, but obviously because we are so deeply entrenched with these characters, their backstories and their interactions with each other now, it's getting more into depth politically, as well as the stakes are constantly getting higher, which is pretty impressive given that the stakes were high in general to start with. So this one, because it started out with interactions with the Fae, and I'm not hugely into Fae as a general concept in literature. I'm really just not a Fae person. It has to be done really well, and to me there's a lot of restrictions and limitations, and there's not a lot of power usually on a wizard or a mortal human to get past the Fae. They seem too OP, like too powerful for me, and when it comes to fighting them, it can just get a little bit too like seat of your pants and just not a lot of hope involved. But Jim Butcher knows how to throw you a plot twist, and so that's why I keep reading these, because whatever he pulls off, I generally really enjoy. And the last part of this book was no exception, because I took about 20% to warm up to this, and usually I'm hooked within a chapter or two of a Dresden book, so that was a little bit disappointing to me. But when it got to the middle and end, and you got to see some characters again that you appreciated and had seen throughout the rest of the series, it was nice to see I guess, reunions and interactions again, which I was really yearning for. And then at the end, it just threw me for six. And I remember sitting at my dinner table and I just put my knife and fork down because I had to process the audiobook while I was listening, and my mouth was open. I couldn't eat anyway. And I was just in shock because this ending was incredible. And so it would have been a 5 stars if I had been hooked immediately from the get-go. Because I took a little bit to warm up to this one, it just got a 4.5, but that's still a pretty good rating. And I'm, as usual, excited to continue with the Dresden Files series. I have a separate playlist, so I'll link all of my Dresden content down below. If you want to discuss spoilers, go over to my other videos, but I really enjoyed this. Standard when it comes to me and a Dresden book, and I am looking forward to continuing. And then I read a young adult contemporary, which again deviates from my general reading taste because, like I said before, I don't really read a lot of YA, but this month it must have just been the time for it. I think because of the Magical Readathon, I was wanting to read more snappy and fast-paced books, and generally YA does that. And so I picked up a YA contemporary, and that is The Surprising Power of a Good Dumpling. And I had this on my 5-star predictions video, and I was just humbly crossing my fingers that it would hit that mark. And it absolutely did. This follows Anna, and she's in the ends of high school. So she's in her late teens, but she's also got to navigate a complicated family relationship. So her mother has depression and she's often bedridden. And so Anna has the responsibility thrust upon her to look after her 2 younger siblings. One of them is 6 years old and one of them is only a year or 2 younger than her. So it was interesting to see all of the family dynamics associated with that, especially because the father, while he was present for the story, he often didn't stay home because he was managing his restaurant. So Anna has to navigate not only her complicated family relationships, the fact that they are deeply entrenched in a Chinese kind of culture, as well as trying to navigate Australian culture at the same time, and then also navigate mental health as well as relationships with friends, with your reputation, and also with working and school life. I found all of the things in this book, and all of the themes especially, were balanced very well, and they all got really good airtime compared to each other. When I went into this, I was like, oh, this is a lot to do in one book. But when I got to the end, there was a moment in there that dealt with mental health very specifically, and it actually made me cry. I found the ending of this incredible. Not only the ending, obviously, I gave it 4 to 4.5 stars all the way through, and then the ending bumped me up to a 5 because it made me quite emotional. I really enjoyed how, again, everything was balanced in here. I liked the characters' interactions. I found everything was quite honest and very to the point without being too abrupt or dismissive. I think everything was handled really well. I really enjoyed the culture. It's Chinese Australian culture, and I really enjoyed the way that Anna as a character encountered everything, explained everything, had internal conflicts and then conflicts with external things as well, and just had the responsibilities that you'd expect from an adult, but she handled them like she was a teenager because she is. So I really enjoyed all of those things, and I like that it was also sex positive as well. There was just so much about this book that I loved, and I really want to recommend this to everybody because it just came out of left field for me. I thought it might be a 5 stars given my friends' opinions on this book, but now that I've read it and I've had an emotional reaction to it, I really enjoyed myself, and I want other people to read it too. So if you're looking for a contemporary that is hard-hitting without being too dark, I think you would enjoy this, because I did, and I don't often reach for YA contemporary, so when I do, I want to be well informed, and I'm glad I made this decision because it was well worth it. If you couldn't guess, I already gave this a 5 stars. And then the last book that I've completed before I talk about the 3 books that I'm currently reading was Perfect State by Brandon Sanderson. This is a science fiction novella of his, and I just got the ebook for this, so I don't have a physical copy. And this one was about a character who has dominion over his world, and he's being essentially set up on a date to go and meet another woman of her dominion who is also a ruler, so they can procreate and make kids and continue their bloodlines. So it sounds pretty standard, but at the same time, because it's sci-fi, they're actually living in their own simulations, and so there is a whole discussion about agency and decisions and identity if you are driven by an external force rather than making decisions yourself. So I found the whole concept really interesting, and the fact that it's a simulation isn't a spoiler. That's addressed very early in the novella, but the way that it was executed, I suppose, it just wasn't really for me. I said in my reading vlog about this, because I read it during the Magical Readathon, that it just didn't quite hit for me the same as Brandon Sanderson's other work has for me. And he is a favourite author of mine, but at the same time, it reads like some of his older work, and I'm very much used to his newer writing that is more character informed, and these characters felt a little bit like caricatures or cutouts of ideas rather than actual characters that I could get emotionally invested in. I don't know if that was just the novella length or if it was actually just a general problem I had with the work in particular. It might not be a problem for other people, but it was a problem for me. Well, not a problem, but it just, I guess, hung me up from giving it more than a 3 stars. So it was enjoyable. I'm glad I've read it. It's more of Sanderson's catalogue that I've got on my list, but it wasn't a new favourite, and Sanderson usually for me often gets at least a 4 or more, so a bit disappointing that he got only a 3, but what can you do? 3 isn't a bad rating, it's just a rating I wish was a little bit higher. But now I'm going to talk about the 3 books that I'm currently reading. One of which is a Brandon Sanderson book, and it is Sunreach by him. It is a novella, so in the Skyward Flight universe, there is Skyward, Starsight, this novella called Sunreach, and then after that there's another novella coming out in October, and then after that there's Cytonic coming out in November, and then there's another novella after that coming out in December. So the way that Brandon Sanderson and Jancy Patterson have collaborated with these novellas, they've scheduled the pacing to coincide with Cytonic, so that's why I'm reading them in the order that they're published, so that I can wind up my anticipation for Cytonic in November and then hopefully talk about each novella as it comes out. So I'm enjoying it so far. It's not as amazing to me as Skyward or Starsight have been, but I am yet to get to the end, and if you read Brandon Sanderson, you know he does his kind of Sanderland trademark ending, so I'm anticipating that things are going to build up to a point that I'm wanting the next novella immediately, and that's what I'm anticipating is going to happen. The other book that I'm currently reading is Arusha and the End of Time. I'm about halfway through this now, and this is about Aru, and one day she just sees the world freeze and she can't do anything about it, and she's told that she is the reincarnated god, so effectively a demigod because she's a human girl, and she has to basically stop the world ending. And this is a Rick Riordan Presents book, so it's in the same vein as Percy Jackson, so going to a magical camp, having a quest and that kind of thing. In this book it's less you have a destiny and more you are a victim of circumstance, which I quite like as well. It's less chosen one tropey and more, oh no, I did a thing and now I need to fix it. And I'm quite liking the tone of this so far. It's at least a 4 stars so far for me, but we'll see how the ending goes. And then in addition to that, I'm also currently reading The Wisdom of Crowds by Joe Abercrombie on audiobook. And that is the 3rd book in his Age of Madness series. And I'm quite enjoying myself with that one because it's the 3rd book in a series and you've got all this build up to it, so you can start with A Blade itself and read all the way through with his trilogy and then all of his novels individually after that. I would personally recommend doing that because there are lots of recurring characters, and the characters in the Age of Madness series are very much characters that you've seen previously, and they're also kids of some characters that you've seen previously. So if you have no knowledge of what's come before, you can make sense of everything, but also it will spoil you for what happens previously. So it's really up to you. Personally, I read all the way through from The Blade itself, and I'm really excited to go back and do a reread because I know that there are side characters and characters' names that I've just forgotten in the time in between reading the books, especially the trilogy, but even before that there are little references to, and I can tell that they're references because they're very specific in the audiobook, but at the same time I'm listening to it and I'm like, I don't remember who that is. So I can't wait to go back and reread it, but I'm enjoying myself so far. The first little bit of it was set up, and that was about 7 to 10% of the audiobook, but now I'm like 30% in, so I'm a third of the way through, I suppose, and I'm really enjoying it. It's really amped up. We've touched base with all the characters that we've seen throughout the series so far in the Age of Madness, and so I'm on board with it. I'm excited. I'm interested to see how everything is going to fall out politically, because this very much follows a rebellion in the industrial age, and so it takes all of the world building that has come before it and all the wars that have come before it, and has revamped everything, and I quite like that. So love the world building, love the characterization, really hope I give it a 4 or 5 stars, which I'm likely to do. So for the moment, that is my reading. Thank you so much for watching this reading wrap up. Come and let me know how many books you finished in September, because I would love to know, and I will chat to you in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.